Welcome again, everybody, to Filipinx and Tech's October virtual event. I'm excited to have you all here today. We're going to have a really fun discussion about data science and data analytics. My name's Abby, and I help coordinate events here for Filipinx and Tech, and I'm really just excited to have you all here tonight. So we're going to learn more about the world of data. So whether you're a pro or just starting out, our panelists here are experts, and they're just going to share their insights with you today. You can always feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we'll be answering them in real time, and we'll also have some time for Q&A afterwards. So don't feel shy. Drop in chat, turn your camera on. This is going to be super casual. We're trying to make this a community thing. So yeah, definitely make this as intimate as possible. And as a quick plug, after today's panel, you can also feel free to stick around. We have a community connections event hosted by our members, Edie and Mari. It's basically speed networking. We'll give you a set of questions to meet other members of our group, just because it's an opportunity to just meet other folks in the space. So if you haven't already, just answer this quick poll just so that we get understanding of why you're here today. I think that can also give our panelists an opportunity to sort of craft their answers accordingly. And I know that, we're about 4 minutes in, so I think we'll go ahead and get started soon, but, tell us your location, tell us why you're here, answer these questions, and then I'll end the poll and we'll get started. So in 1 minute, we'll move forward. Okay, so we do have some folks who are interested in a career in data, but mostly are here to just meet others. And in the chat, we've got Toronto, more California folks, Daly City. Okay. Cool. So as folks trickle in, I'm going to close the poll now. And let's just give a quick Zoom round of applause for our panelists. So I'm joined here by Karl and Elamparo, TJ Sevilla, Sarah Wu, and Ray Rodero. So let's just do some quick intros and an icebreaker question. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what your favorite Filipino food is. And for our attendees, let us know what your favorite Filipino food is. So Karl, let's start with you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Karlo Elamparo. I'm currently working at Meta. I've been working here for about 2 years, and I've been in data for about 6. Before data, I used to be in finance, investments, and everything in the Philippines. So happy to meet everyone. And I guess for my favorite food, it would be piaya, which is a delicacy from Negros Occidental, I think. It's unleavened bread with molasses inside. It's pretty good. So
I'll have to try that. Thank you, Karl. Sarah, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm a senior data analyst at Twitter/X. I joined in 2019, and I help, my stakeholders across ads health, trust and safety, revenue analytics. I basically help them make data-driven decisions. I'm born and raised in Metro Manila. And my fun fact is I hate fizzy drinks, and I've never had Coca-Cola. My favorite Filipino food is cebu lechon. To me, it's just the ultimate holiday food. I think when you live away from family, and mostly I only get to see them during the holidays, all those things are kind of intertwined and are closely associated, like Christmas, family, lechon. And I always feel really festive when I see a big old pig getting carved up on the table.
Oh man, I'm very glad that I ate dinner before this. Thank you, Sarah. TJ, what about you?
Yep. Hi, everyone. So I'm TJ. I'm currently a manager for the data infrastructure and strategy team here at Uber and SF. I've been at Uber for 6.5 years now, going on 7. And I started out at the Uber Manila office, worked there for like 2.5 years before moving over here at the HQ in San Francisco. Before this, I was a teacher of electronics engineering. And yeah, so my favorite food, I'm going to give 2. Like for the main course, I love chicken tinola. And for dessert, I'm a big fan of leche flan, whether it's like by itself or as part of halo-halo. So yeah.
Very versatile dessert, I think, that's for sure. And then Ray, lastly, you.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm Ray. I'm a senior data scientist for product at Borrow Money, which is a neobank for the working class. And I've been working in data for the past 6 years now in both corporate and startup scenes. Back in the Philippines, I worked in government, FMCGs, and NGOs. And I come from Antipolo.
And your favorite food?
Oh yeah, my
Healthy
favorite food, it's lumpia, the Filipino egg roll. So for its versatility, you can have it full of meat or just veggies, fresh or fried, dipped in gravy or sweet chili sauce, and have it as a snack or a main with rice.
Very, very true. Okay. Well, thank you for those intros. I think we're really excited to hear more about all of your experiences. So I think our first topic then will just be general questions about data science and data analytics. And you hear this often in tech. It's just, what do you do? And I think that varies depending on what your role is and what your company is and even the product. So I think, how do you just generally define data science and data analytics? And Ray, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I would say data science and analytics is it's the field of connecting the dots between data and business, like to keep it simple. If I use an analogy to illustrate data, it's like preparing a meal. You clean the food, similar to cleaning the data. Usually data in its raw form is pretty messy. You then cook the food. That's when you do the analysis or you build models depending on what your objective is. And then you plate the food to make it nice, right? That's when you put it into a visualization or a presentation for other people to consume and understand. So that's the general data science field. Now you can specialize in doing just one part of the process. You can just keep cleaning the food, right? Cleaning the data, or you can just create like visualizations or presentations. Or you can be exposed to everything, doing the entire data lifecycle. And then you can work on automating this, similar to fast food model, or be really like hands-on with the data, like a home cook, right?
We got amazing use of analogies. I think that was really helpful for even me to understand it. Thank you.
You asked about Filipino food, so I thought like food is always the best.
Yes. Solid choice. I guess, Karl, do you have anything like to add or elaborate on? I mean, how did you feel about Ray's definition?
Yeah, I would frame it similarly, although a bit differently. I would frame it as just asking three questions. What's going on? How are we doing? And what should we do? And basically, data and analytics is answering those three, and we'll get through each of those. So the first one is what's going on. I think data needs to answer or give a quantitative backing to our understanding of reality. What's happening? Is our sales going higher for the right reasons or for the right hypotheses? Those are the kinds of questions that we want to ask and have the data backing on. The second one is, how are we doing? Once we have a shared understanding of reality and our stakeholders are talking in the same language, and then we get to ask, what specific metrics should we use in order to guide everyone to the right direction? And that's usually a point of contention, is finding that right metric, finding the right sets of metrics to get everyone on the same page and moving in the right direction. And the final thing, though, that data should answer, or analysts in data and scientists in data, is what should we be doing? What should we do? And that involves a bit of strategy, a bit of deeper understanding of where you want the product to go. So.
Yeah, no, I think that those are really both good ways to sort of frame what the field is, because I'm sure, as you all four of you will outline, it's sort of shaped a little bit differently, but the fundamental core will always remain the same, just basically aligning on those things and making sure that you're measuring what you need to measure. So I think a lot of the sort of feedback we hear just about any sort of role in tech, especially data, is just like, how do you get into it? There isn't necessarily a linear way for folks to get in. And after I spoke to the four of you, I think that we've all sort of found or fallen in through it. So I would love to just like dig into that a little bit more. So I think just starting with TJ, just tell us a little bit about how your career journey into data was like and how you arrived at your current role.
Thanks. And actually, in my case, I think it was pretty unexpected because like I graduated in the Philippines with an electronics engineering like course. So throughout my entire like college life, I thought I was going to be like an engineer or at least in an engineering related field. So like telecommunications, like semiconductors and so on and so forth. And then what I did initially was I took a board exam, so that was more or less like required to be able to have the license. And then I taught for 2.5 years in my home university. And then right after that, I was thinking of going corporate. So I was like, maybe it might be good to get a master's degree before going the corporate route. So I went to like Singapore, took my master's in system design and management, and then went back home thinking I was gonna land an engineering job. Alas, it was like more difficult than I thought it would be. And the opportunity that was like available during that time was one in data analytics. And was an opportunity I jumped into just because like it really aligned with like my STEM background. And technically there's no data analytics course in like actually wherever like you look. I mean, it's only a new thing right now. So basically any STEM course would like qualify. So I went in, applied, and I got my first like corporate job at Uber Manila in 2017. And I've been at Uber ever since, working initially as part of like a data team and then going to a global team. And then finally getting transferred here in SF. So yeah, that's basically my journey. And in terms of like the data I'm working with, so I started out as a data analyst. I kind of like moved a bit to the back end. Now I'm working more with the data engineers, as well as like some of our like analysts who are our stakeholders. So there's some shifting in terms of like the actual role as well. But overall, like yeah, the biggest takeaway from my journey is like I moved more or less from the academe to the corporate world, and I landed in like the analytics world as part of that.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I guess like Sarah, how does that sort of compare to how you came into your role?
I would say like my journey is super typical of somebody in the Philippines. I think TJ's is more unusual because he taught and he already took a master's degree in engineering. But for me, like my undergrad was in business. So I was a business major in the University of the Philippines. That was a pretty generalist program. You could basically go into several different fields. And after graduating, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I kind of relied on, when I was interviewing for different jobs, just looking for the smartest people that I could find that I felt like I could learn a lot from. So my first job was as an analyst at a large property developer in the Philippines. My boss had a like a consulting background. So a lot of work early on was around analysis and kind of the art of crafting messages for a presentation. I learned a lot from him. And one of the things that he really pushed me to do was to consider doing a master's degree abroad, because he kind of did the same thing and he thought it was like the most reliable way to kind of break out into a different path or take your career to the next level. So around 2017, I moved to New York City to start a master's degree in Columbia. From there, I would say like my time in New York, my time in Columbia, there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of doing my best to network, which I was not the best at. And then after graduation, I eventually got an offer from Twitter, and then I moved over to San Francisco in 2019. From there, it's been a big adventure. My first year, I was super excited. It was extremely fun diving into like a new work culture, a new industry. And then the pandemic happened, and then I think most people are aware of what's happened in the last year. So yeah, it's been a journey with Twitter.
Yes, quite a statement to make there. So I guess I'm sure our attendees in the audience would be curious a little bit about what your role is like in your companies and what that day-to-day is, because I think I've said it a few times here that it's going to look different per company. But let's sort of look into the details. So I guess, Ray, why don't you give us a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like in your role?
Sure, yeah. So what my day-to-day looks like, I would say, so our team is patterned similarly to an engineering team. So we work in what you call 2-week sprints. So what does that mean? So every 2 weeks, you work with your manager and plan what needs to be done. Ideally, like you initiate this. It's a balancing act of what is current priority versus like what's in the backlog, quick tasks versus like time-consuming effort, and like your projects versus like ad hoc requests, right? Ideally, you want to put like move your own achievements, put them in the limelight, but also enable others with the data that they need. So that will determine if what your schedule will like. Do you need to set up meetings with people, or do you need long blocks of concentration, like heads down work? In terms of like what types of work that I need to do, I would say it's divided between meetings with people, scoping the data, building the code or the model, and like presenting your work. Now, depending on where I am at each project, like each of those would like take up more time than the others, right? But working at a startup, I'd say that sometimes you get pulled in on company-wide priorities, because like a startup doesn't have enough resources. That's like basically unlimited ones, right? So even if you have these like 2-week sprints all planned out, like then one day you'll just get called in to like work on something else totally like different. So like say in my case, the start of the sprint was yesterday. I planned everything out, but just like end of this day, I just was called in to help on preparing for our quarterly board meeting at the end, for the end of the week. So already half of my sprint is already just pulling in the data, preparing the data for presenting to the board.
Lots of meetings. That's very interesting.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I guess, Karl, do you experience something similar? And I know it's a different company, so how does that sort of stack up with your experience?
Yeah, it's very similar to my previous work at a startup called Earnest. Startup culture is very fast, and it's also in 2-week sprints. I think in terms of my day-to-day and my current role, it's a bit different. So my team focuses on machine learning applications. And so we create machine learning models that try to predict a certain behavior from a user or from any sort of entity. And so what that entails is first understanding what the problem is. So talking to people, getting intimate with the product, understanding all of the different flows of data that go in and out of the usage of that product, and trying to understand what outcome we want, and finally creating a model that will create a prediction that will help us get to what we want. And relative to that, my day-to-day it would depend on what part of that cycle I'm going through. If it's understanding the problem, then I would be meeting people. If it's creating the model, then I would be programming for the majority of the day. And if it's at the very end, when we already have that model and we're creating predictions, then it's presentations. It's basically telling people of what we're doing, why this model helps, and what are the benefits to the company as a whole.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of talking to other folks, meeting with other folks, sort of presenting your case. So I guess another question just for the panel is just who are these folks that you're meeting with? So I know that we're hearing about leadership, we're hearing about other stakeholders, but who specifically are these teams? Yeah, I guess, Sarah, what are some teams that you work with day to day in your role?
Sure. So my coverage is fairly broad. I feel like I've worked with every function except HR, maybe. So in terms of people I've worked with, I've worked a lot in the ads health space, which is kind of like trust and safety for monetization. So there I work with like product, engineering, ops, policy, and legal. So they all have basically varying levels of needs and also varying levels of technical ability. So you kind of have to tailor what your output is to their use case. And then the other side of my work supports sales. So it's really everybody from marketing, sales ops, finance. So it's kind of the same thing. You have to get to know your stakeholder, what they really need, and then make sure that the output that you're producing is appropriate for them.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, TJ, do you have anything to sort of add to that, or are you sort of interfacing with similarly in a broad sense?
In my case, like because my department, like community operations, it's more focused on the customer support space. So there are some overlaps with like what the teams that Sarah mentioned, but I think it's a bit more narrow in my case. Like, so my team, like data infrastructure and strategy, we kind of like serve as the middleman between data engineering and the data analysts of our department. So what that means is we take the requirements from our data analysts. Basically, we ask them, okay, what data do you need to enable your analysis? And then they let us know. And then we go to data engineering and we work with them very closely to be able to build these data tables, these data pipelines to enable like the analysis of our partner teams downstream. And sometimes we also like interface with some of our leaders, especially if they need like some ad hoc analyses. But all in all, like we kind of like sit more out on the back end side just to make sure that everyone has what they need. They have the right tools, they have the right tables, because in the end, like especially if the company like gets bigger, it gets harder and harder to manage these like data items, and you need to make sure that they kind of like all fit together like a well-built like in structure with a good like data plan, with a good like data flow, and so on and so forth. So yep, that's our job, and it's pretty fun, and overall like definitely also lots of meetings. So I guess it's something in common across like across the board.
Yes, definitely. Especially if you're trying to get people to understand, right? So I guess that makes a lot of sense. So we saw in our poll that, there are some folks who are interested in pivoting into a career in data science or data analytics. So I guess from your perspective, panelists, like what are some of your favorite parts or least favorite parts about the role? Because I'm sure it's not all sunflowers and daisies, right? So what do you like, and what are some things that you wish you didn't have to do? Karl, how about we start with you?
Yeah, I guess my favorite part is working with people that come from different backgrounds. In data science, it's very broad in the sense that it's a new and burgeoning field where the path to becoming a data scientist is pretty large. You have a lot of opportunities to go into it. You can come from finance, you can come from academia like TJ has. You could have studied actual sciences or physical sciences like physics or biology, and eventually end up being a data scientist because of the tools that you've learned along the way. And what that implies is, or what that means for me in my day-to-day is I work with other data scientists who have different perspectives. So if we're tackling this problem of, let's say, predicting if a certain user would click on a certain advertisement, they might suggest that, oh, why don't we use this technique, which they might have picked up from evolutionary biology or from physics, and apply it to this space. And so I learn from them, and they also learn from me, from my tools in finance, and everyone just learns along, and everyone gets better. Rising tide lifts all boat kind of situation. I guess the least favorite part of the job is explaining to people or trying to explain really low-level concepts or very complex concepts into a high level, and sort of making that projection from low level to high level. It's hard because you want them to get buy-in as to what you're trying to do, but at the same time, you're losing information by making that parallel, by making that projection from low level to high level. And I kind of don't like that part because it loses the nuance, it loses all of the grace and the beauty of the solution.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I was a Japanese teacher, and I think that sometimes things are hard to explain, but in order for someone to get it, you have to water it down, and that really eliminates a lot of like nuance, as you said. Yeah. Sarah, how does that sort of stack up? Do you agree with Karl? Do you like the peopling part about your role, or are you like absolutely not?
I think there's a lot of parallels in people's experiences. I feel like the people who get into data analytics, there are definitely similarities amongst us. I think the thing that I like the most is similar to Karl's point about people coming from everywhere. There's a lot of moldability for your career. It is a relatively young field. Organizationally, it can be messy, like depending on whether the team is set up for success or not. But I think as an individual, you kind of have to think about it as you have to have the initiative to try a bunch of different things and direct where you want your career to go. Whether you want to be a subject matter expert in a particular field like marketing or trust and safety, and really have those like super deep relationships with your stakeholders, or do you want to go more technical and go into ML engineering or data engineering? I think having that initiative is super important. And then another thing for me is I think the problem solving part is really satisfying. Like sometimes you're trying to solve a puzzle, and this job definitely has that. In terms of my least favorite, and I would caveat that this is highly dependent on culture and I guess like data literacy of the people that you work with. The thing I hate the most is when there's an agenda or there's already a message that people want to push on you in the data. I wouldn't say that I've experienced it a lot. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen sometimes when people want to present a particular state of things or that the data points to them needing something when it doesn't really. I think as people in data, we want to get to the truth, or we want to present an image of truth. And that part of the job can feel really bullshitty, and it is kind of like super against what you want to do. So yeah, I think in that case, you kind of have to do a lot more convincing, and you have to get, support from your manager to kind of push back on those people. But there's definitely a lot more convincing in the field than I thought there would be. Like, it's not like this is the data and this is the truth. That's not true. That's not reality.
Yes, I think in product management, I think there's a lot of cherry picking. You're sort of finding what suits your narrative. And I think that's really interesting because we're all looking at the same numbers, but we're interpreting it slightly differently. So I think having that argument can be really tough and challenging, especially if it's something that you thought was straightforward, but it's not. I guess that's a really good segue into what types of skills are sort of relevant for this type of role. So we're hearing a lot about like peopling, but also like the analytical side, hard and soft skills. So I know TJ, you're a people manager, you do a lot of like hiring and things like that. So what are some hard and soft skills that someone in, data science or data analytics should have?
Yep. So actually, I like what Sarah described as like problem solving skills, because that's definitely the first and most important skill that we're looking for. So when we interview like candidates, like we usually like give them like a technical exam or something like that. So of course it definitely like helps to know the programming language or the technical like language that's needed to be able to work as a data analyst. Usually it's SQL. And when we test for this skill, like we definitely want see like whether the candidate like knows how to make their way around the code or not. It's kind of like, for example, a professional like knows when someone knows or does not know like the language. So there's definitely, that's one point there. But going back to like the problem solving skill, that's something that you learn, like I guess the background plays some part in it, but at the same time, it's something that's probably a developed or an innate skill in the person. Like, for example, like I think one of the reasons why by data analytics, like usually like teams usually hire like people from STEM is because they expect the STEM people to have like a well-developed like logical reasoning faculty, as well as like being able to apply the scientific method, like whether like consciously or unconsciously when talking with their stakeholders. So by that, I mean like looking at the situation, coming up with a hypothesis, like perform an experiment in the form of like gathering enough data to support or disprove that hypothesis, and then presenting it as a conclusion to their stakeholders. So that's very important, especially when the business stakeholders are asking like different hard to answer questions. So that's definitely one of the most critical ones. And the second one I'd say is more of a soft skill. It's kind of like a fire inside, wherein like you won't basically like we're looking for people that won't get satisfied until they know the exact root cause of a problem, or they're able to explain fully and understand fully like what something is. And this is a trait that I've seen in a lot of like successful analysts. Like they just have to know what exactly happened, and they have to be able to communicate that with the people like around them. So yeah, that's a quick summary of what I think is needed to succeed in this particular field.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's super helpful. I think Ray, I'm sure you have your perspective on that too. So what are some like additional soft skills or hard skills, or did TJ hit them all? What do you think?
I think TJ is like is right like in all those areas. From my perspective, I think the basics are, of course, like being comfortable with the numbers, looking at data tables, and reading and writing code. There's no way around it. Like you do this every day, so yeah, you have to like be comfortable doing this. Beyond that, I would say it depends on your role. So I work with product. I do a lot of experimentation on the product and make those like little changes, then tracking and presenting those metrics. So it's important to have that product mindset. Like you always ask yourself, how can we improve the product, and make a data-driven decision with that. Subject matter expertise is also important. So currently, like I work with an app, so knowledge of the app is important. But in my previous role at American Express, I worked in finance, so understanding of the balance sheet is important there. And I would say as you manage up, conversations become less technical and more about business impact. So presentation skills are also a must. And if you want to become more data or ML engineer, so then it becomes a lot heavier on the stats and coding, but that's not always the case. I'd say like adding to what TJ said as well, like if we talk about what's important for interviewing, like TJ mentioned, you can't avoid a technical interview, which is in the form of either a live coding exercise, or you talk about your projects to a fellow data scientists, and they'll ask you a lot of like stats or coding questions about that. Or you're given a data project and asked to present it in a few days on your next round of interview. So you need to like have those skills to like be able to be able to prepare for that technical interview.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I also appreciate, sort of digging into a little bit about how to become an SME or a subject matter expert, because the different skill sets, you'll have to sort of focus on different audiences, right? Like who you're working with day to day, and more frequently, presentation is really important for anything. But I like that you threw that and added that in as well. Okay, so I think for the audience, one thing that I found was really interesting when we were planning this was that all 4 of our panelists have had experience both working in the Philippines and the United States. Traditionally, our panelists have in the past mostly just worked in the US. So I think it'd be really interesting for our panelists today to sort of share what their experiences were. So I don't know. Yeah. So what were some of the differences that you've noticed between working in like a Philippines-based company versus a US-based company? So Karl, let me start with you.
Oh, I unmuted myself.
He just rage quit on me. His camera off.
Yeah, I guess the biggest difference is culture. In the US, you're incentivized to speak clearly and speak forwardly about your opinions, to champion them, and to have conviction with what you're talking about, so that people are or have confidence that you know what's happening, that if we're doing well, and what we should be doing. In the Philippines, there is a lot more space to be democratic, I guess, in the sense of people generally beat around the bush. They're not as forward. You have to sort of feel out what the different needs are, requirements are. And that's the expectation, is you're not too forward. So I think that adjustment is definitely one of the large adjustments that I personally have had to make, is how do I become more communicative, how to become more forward, and how to advocate for my own ideas versus trying to get a collective response and synthesizing those.
Yeah, Sarah, how about you? Does that sort of like match to your experience having worked in both countries?
Yeah, I think having to speak up more is definitely not just true in the workplace, but like in the US in general. I think something I want to differentiate too is working in the US versus working in the US in tech. I feel like tech culture is still like its own animal. Like if I get out of my body and think about everything I've experienced in the last 4.5 years, I don't think it's normal in any way. But in general, if I want to differentiate between the Philippines and the US, I think one of the things is that there's less feeling of hierarchy here. I think my first job in the Philippines, I worked with a lot of super senior people, and a lot of the time you kind of had to like go through somebody's secretary or try to get to someone more on your level. Like it's not normal to talk to somebody super senior. I think here one of the things that really jumped out when I started my job here is that you need help with something or you have a question about something, you can talk to like a staff software engineer. It's not that big a deal. They're gonna help you. And then I think more importantly, if you don't know something or if you mess up a little bit, there's a lot more trust that you're doing your best and nobody's gonna crucify you for it. Not that they would in the Philippines, but I worked for a property developer, so like I think rightfully so, the margins for error there are much lower if you're building a building versus you're shipping out software. But it really jumped out at me how much trust there was, and how as a new person, like I felt like I didn't have to be so intimidated by really senior people. And I think one last thing is Philippine working culture is super personal. Everyone I know from my undergrad, including myself, we hung out a lot with work colleagues outside of work all the time. Not that it doesn't happen here, but there's more of a line between your work life and your personal life, I feel like.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking back to just even stories about my dad. A lot of his close friends were folks that he has worked with in the Philippines. And even though they're dispersed throughout the US and across the world, those are some of the closest connections that he has. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't think I could speak to that to my previous workplaces, right? So I think that's a really interesting observation there. TJ, how about you? Yeah, I'm going one by one.
Yeah, so I actually fully agree with what like Karl and like Sarah mentioned. I could like add up +1 to everything they said. Also, like of course, like one of the most obvious differences is that you here in the US you work with a more diverse group of people. So in the Philippines, like so I work for the same company in the Philippines and here in the US, it's both Uber. Like I just work for the Manila office of Uber. So technically, like there's a company-wide effort to maintain the same working culture across offices like globally. However, like the local culture like will also like shine through more or less. And in terms of like the people, like for example, like in the Philippines, it's mostly homogenous. Like everyone, maybe 90% of the people working there are Filipino. So you share the same cultures, share the same language, and share the same like humor and so on and so forth. Whereas moving here to the US, there's a bit of an adjustment because like everyone comes from a lot of different backgrounds, and when it comes to like a diverse workplace, you need to make sure that you are able to like adjust and like, accommodate for slight differences in like communication style, in like approaching problems and making things known and so on and so forth. So it's a bit of an adjustment, but overall like a good one because it also kind of like leads to a journey of like self-discovery, like who am I really when placed in a different environment with like different types of people. And you meet a lot of new friends along the way, and yeah, friends that have different cultures from those of yours. So that's one. And second is like here in the US, especially since the HQ of the company I work for is here in the United States, like everything feels a bit more central. Like I say that in terms of like the decisions that are made by the company, or the decisions that I make in my team, I feel that it kind of like impacts more like individuals across the company. Not to say that I wasn't part of a global team while I was in APAC in Manila, but just being here and being able to meet like the executives and the leaders that are based here, it kind of like lends a slightly different flavor to the work environment. So there's pros and cons to that, but overall, like both places are have their own like highs and lows. But overall, like yeah, I'm thankful for the experience of being able to work in the Philippines and the US.
For sure. And I think working at like a hub specifically, that is a unique experience in itself, to your point. Ray, how about you? What were some like differences that you've noticed between working in the Philippines and the US?
Well, TJ and Sarah's like correct. That's also like my experience here. But I guess like a more lighthearted take is, so like my last stint back home was in the government, which is like the total opposite to working at a tech startup here. So here I call our CEO by his first name. But in the government, hierarchy is very felt there. I only address people by their title or rank. Secretary, senator, ambassador. And if I call you by your first name, then you're not important enough to have a title. So culturally also as well, like work and personal tend to get mixed. Your workmates will tend to become like your college friends, or you treat them like your college friends. You get invited to eating out a lot, tons of drinking sessions on Fridays, especially if you're around the same age group. Filipinos also tend to work longer hours because you spend a lot of time chatting during work, but you also plan your work. You plan your after work around avoiding traffic, especially like payday Friday or anytime during a typhoon. Gossip is also more common and widespread. It's been like 10 years since I left my first company, and I still get updated on the love life of someone at the sales department in that company. Yeah.
I just dropped in the chat, but I just can't resist a cheese me. So yeah, I definitely feel that, even though I have not worked in the Philippines. So I know that when we were also planning this, we were also just talking about, we're all working in the US now, or US-based companies, and do we have other Filipino coworkers? And I think like the span across the board was definitely different. It definitely depends on like the roles that they're in. So I just want to kind of talk a little bit about that, since this is Filipinx in Tech. We're trying to like grow and connect with the rest of our community, just because there are some times where that's not visible with our direct coworkers. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, I want us to talk a little bit about, each other's experiences that way. So I guess Ray, I'll start with you. Do you have a lot of Filipino coworkers, and what types of roles are they in at your company?
I would say no, to be blunt about it. In startups, which is around like, say in my company is around like 300 people. And like for the past 3 startups that I worked with, you get to meet that like some software engineer or someone in marketing or a support role, also Filipino. But in general, you don't see a lot of Filipinos in tech roles, much less in the startup scene. Even if there is one, it's very unlikely that I get to work with them. The reality is that you will, especially in data, you will work with more Indian or Chinese colleagues than any other Asian country. From let's say from my master's, most of my classmates were Indian or Chinese as well. So you can already see what the pipeline of talent will look like when you go into work, right? So yeah, that's my experience.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Just to hear the different types of, I guess, demographics that you're seeing in different types of roles. Yeah, TJ, what about you? Where are the Filipinos or Filipinas in your workplace?
Yep. In my case, like the situation is slightly different because I'm technically my department is a customer support department. So there are more Filipinos here. Like on my floor, there are at least 6 other Filipinos aside from myself. And I think all of them also came from the Manila office of Uber. So because Uber has some mobility programs that allow employees to like transfer between offices. So a lot of people have taken the opportunity to move offices like either to the US or to Europe or to other like Uber office around the world. And what I'd say is the Filipino presence here at Uber is it's pretty well known, or I think at least there's a small ERG as well, employee resource group, wherein like we meet other Filipinos from other departments, and there are like quite a number of like Filipinos and Phil-Ams here. So I'm not sure if that's because of the size of the company or because we have an office in Manila that allows for internal transferees, or it could also be due to the fact that the Philippines is kind of known for the BPO and the customer support industry, and there's probably like more opportunities for Filipinos working in those fields to move over across countries within global tech org. So that's my experience. But maybe to like double down to what like Ray said, like for very technical roles, there's probably like less Filipinos than compared to like the other like types of roles here, because most of the Filipinos I know are program managers or like at legal or HR or some other departments. Like within the analytics like roles, I know very few. I think probably 1 or 2 or 3 other people here that are Filipinos and also work in data analytics. So yeah, that's my experience, and yeah, happy to share it with the group.
Yeah, I think it's just really interesting. I think that, you know, it's good to hear that there are ERGs like that, even communities like this, just to connect with other Filipinos who are in the space. It just shows that we're not, you know, as visible in certain roles. So I think that it's really important to just call that out and talk about it, and even just, you know, shout out to your observations. We're approaching with 10 minutes left, so I think we can start to open up to the audience. So I don't know if anybody in the audience right now wants to drop in the chat a question, or if you want to come off mute. Right now is a really good opportunity to do that. So I think I'll give folks like 1 minute to type or come off mute. I think I have to like adjust my view a little bit. So any questions for the panel at this time?
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Can
Hi,
you
Michelle.
hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Okay. Hello. That's a lot of information, and I'm very surprised and become interested on the insights of our panelists, and I'm very much interested to know. I'm a current student taking up business analytics at the US right now, and I'm more interested to know what advice do you have for students like me that is aspiring to enter the field of data science and analytics? What are your recommendations or advice for students like us?
I really want to answer that. I could go first. Yeah, I guess my advice is that there are so many resources out there that can teach you what you need to know. Google, YouTube, even ChatGPT. These are all things that in your free time, you should go and read upon. I think that having a hunger for these technical tools will only help in the future, just because you never know what sorts of tools are going to be in vogue or required by these companies as time goes on.
I got that. Plus one to that. Also, like what I advise is that if you're starting to look for a job, like just get in there, like even like regardless of like the company or the type of job and so on and so forth. Like if it has like data analytics in it, or if it gives you the chance to kind of like be exposed to these tools, to the work environment that uses like data, go for it. Because to be honest, like it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation. Like you need data experience to work at data analytics, but I mean, the reverse also like holds true. So you just got to get in there, make sure you build your expertise, and eventually like get familiar with like the technical like jargon, the technical tools, the technical skills needed to excel at this particular like field. Because like once you interview, like interviewers will actually like know right away if you like know what you're talking about or not, especially during like live coding exams. So my advice is just make sure you master these and get some real world exposure in the form of like an internship or a program or something like that that would give you the exposure you need?
I think for me, definitely agree with getting that baseline of the skills that are needed for the role. But thinking back to when I was interviewing for this job, I think you want to exhibit curiosity about a specific role, especially ones that, you apply to like 50 roles, you're only going to be really passionate about a couple. I think you want to try really hard for your moonshot ones, the ones that you really care about. And then, lean into something that you really care about and something that you think you can do better than other candidates. Whether that's like you care a lot about, I don't know, online communities, or you care a lot about payments. I think you really want to show that you did your research about the role, the team, and that you really care about this role. And it's not just like a mass sending of emails that you're doing.
Mine is networking. While you're still studying, definitely like plant those seeds, develop those relationships. So when you start your OPT, you can now like tap into those networks and like help you refer to those jobs. You only really like what Sarah said, it's very hard to, if you just like keep sending resumes to all those job portals. What really gets you in, or what gets your foot into the door, is those referrals, personal connections that send it to the hiring managers, in addition to what everyone else said.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Michelle. So in the chat, Brandon had asked, what's the best way to pivot into data science from an operations role? Or I guess even more generally, what are some pieces of advice that you could give to folks who are looking to pivot from another role?
So I could like go first here. So you mentioned like you were in an operations role. If your team has an analytics, like if your operations team is an analytics team supporting your operations role, I suggest like pivoting to that analytics team, just because like for a data analytics like role, like the teams like value not just your technical skills, but also your understanding of the business and operations, because in the end, the data is just a representation of business and operations. So if you have if your operations team has an analytics team like tied to it, that would probably be your first entry and first foray into like data analytics in a field or in a team wherein you're very familiar with what exactly is happening. And I've seen that happen like at least a couple of times here where I work. I've seen like program managers or operations managers become like analysts. And so that's definitely like the quickest path to like getting your foot in the door.
Totally. I'm just going to go through the chat. So more of like a speed round. So whoever can grab it can grab the question. So RJ, you had to ask a question. Is it important to instill and practice your Filipino values and co-work with your coworkers and supervisors, to even those who are not? Or rather, maybe let me rephrase this question. Is it important for you to sort of instill and practice your Filipino values, even for those who are not really familiar with them? I think that's kind of a hard question if anyone wants to try to tackle that.
No takers? I can take this one.
Thank you.
I think it's a very good question. I also think that there needs to be a precursor to it, which is dispelling maybe some biases that coworkers might have when they encounter Filipinos. So one of my favorite stories to tell is like, I've had multiple people telling me, oh, can you also sing and dance? And that's because that's what we're known for. And those sorts of jokes are symptomatic of an underlying, perhaps structural bias that they might have. And so I think that before trying to show what Filipino values are, it's important to dispel what Filipino biases are in their minds.
That's a snaps to that, because that's very real. We're dealing with a lot of stereotypes, singing and dancing especially, both of which I can not do. So I think that's a really good call out. All right, Sean in the chat, they're asking, how do you see the field evolving over time? And please provide your level of significance, alpha. Zany emoji.
I want to answer this one too.
Go for it.
So I guess there are two answers to this. The first one is data science and data analytics, or maybe you can consolidate them. I think that generative AI is definitely going to play a big role. We're going to see a lot of consolidation of technical skills into people who are more broad-based and who understand not just the technical skills, but how it applies to the business, because you can do a lot of that technicality through the use of generative AI. We're going to see the development of what they call agents, AI agents, which help you in your job. And so understanding how to fully utilize those in your work, in your ability to perform how you do your analytics and how you perform your models is going to be a very key skill that you should develop in the coming years. I have a 99% confidence of that one.
Amazing. Thank you. I know that we have 2 minutes left, so I just want to give our panelists an opportunity to sort of just give a shout on how to best reach them. So I'll start from right to left on my screen. So that'll be Ray. So how can our attendees best connect with you? Email, LinkedIn? What sort of support could you give? Just give a quick spiel on that.
Sure. So yeah, you can reach me on email, ra.roderos@gmail.com, or I think best is on LinkedIn, since I assume like you also the event on LinkedIn. Yeah, if like my experience here is that I was a student, took my master's here, and then joined the American Express, and like joined startups after that. So if you're interested in like how is it to like break into like just working in the US in general as a student, yeah, just hit me up. And also like if you're interested in about traditional finance and also like working at startups, yeah, happy to like share my experience and insights.
Thank you. Sarah, what about you?
LinkedIn for me probably. Yeah, just send me a message. I'm happy to talk more about my experience. Yeah, I think my career so far has been like the typical path of how a Filipino gets to the US. I think I struggled a lot with I was really anxious about getting a job. I was really anxious when I was starting my job. I'm really anxious now. So yeah, I think talking about how to manage the workplace, I'm happy to talk about that.
Thank you so much. For folks who are attending, I dropped all the panelists' LinkedIn's in the chat, so you can start that connection now. TJ, what's the best way for folks to reach you if not LinkedIn, and what sorts of topics could you best assist with?
Yep. So in my case, like also LinkedIn. So yep, I'll be happy to provide advice on what people or hiring managers might be looking for with regards to like resumes or soft or hard skills in data analytics, as well as like provide some advice as to like what to pursue and how to get into like the field in terms of like just getting the correct set of like technical skills or like whatever like knowledge is needed to get it there. So I can give a bit of advice here and there, no guarantees, and I guess apologies in advance because sometimes I reply late. So yeah, that's a bad habit of mine.
It's always good to give a heads up. And then Karl, how about you?
Yeah, everyone can add me on LinkedIn. In terms of advice, I had the atypical route of going to data science, which is completely from a different field, and I basically pivoted to data science using Google, YouTube. So if you guys want advice on how to start that process, maybe my method could also work for you. Again, like TJ mentioned, sorry in advance if not.
Amazing. So I know we're a minute over, but Karl, TJ, Sarah, Ray, thank you so much for taking the time out today and just sharing your experience getting into the field. Everybody, I hope you please connect. Give a virtual round of applause. Yeah. If you want to hang around and stick around for networking, definitely do so. But I definitely understand that you all have lives. So yes, we'll be hanging around here, but feel free to drop off if you can. I'm going to hit stop record. So there's going to be a loud voice that says stop recording is stopping.